Hello, and welcome to session 1 of the second day of the Global Solar Council Virtual Forum, organized by the Global Solar Council, obviously, in cooperation with SolarPower Europe and with the support of GetInvest. My name is Máté Heisz. I'm Director of Global Affairs at SolarPower Europe, and I'm also co-chair of the Global Solar Council, and it's my pleasure to be the moderator of this session. In this session, we will be speaking about policies. What policy developments and trends have we seen in Sub-Saharan Africa in recent years? What do we expect in the near future? And how can policies and regulations support the scale up of solar investments on the continent? To explore this interesting topic, we have invited 4 distinguished speakers who will each give us a short input presentation, which will be followed by a panel discussion. I would already like to encourage the audience to ask questions in the chat, which we will be happy to take up and discuss after the presentations. With this, and without further ado, I would like to invite the speakers to join me on the virtual stage. So please turn on your cameras. And our speakers for this session are Eder Semedo, Sustainable Energy Expert at the ECOWAS Center for Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency, ECREEE. Welcome, Eder. Thanks for accepting our invitation. Segun Adaju, President of REAN, the Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria. Welcome. Silvia Piana, Head of Regulatory Affairs, Africa, Asia, and Oceania at Enel Green Power. Hello, Silvia. And Hadyr Koumakpai, General Manager in charge of Africa at JA Solar. So thanks to our speakers for being here with us today. As said, we will start with a round of presentations, having your perspectives on the subject matter of this topic. And then we will deep dive into some interesting aspects in a panel discussion. So with this, I'm handing it over to Eder Semedo from ECREEE. Please go ahead with your presentation. Over to you. Please unmute yourself, Eder.
Okay, now it's working. So good morning, Máté. Good morning, everyone. I hope you can see my screen already. Yeah. Okay. So I'll go. As Máté said, my name is Eder Semedo. I work for ECREEE. I'm going to give you a quick snapshot of what ECREEE does in terms of promoting renewables, in particularly solar PV power. ECREEE as an institution has been working for 11 years now, and this is a institution, an agency from ECOWAS in West Africa, working for 15 different member states. Moving forward, I think you can see here, just for our audience who are not familiar with ECOWAS, is a region which comprises 15 member states from Cape Verde to the west, to Niger to the east, Mali to the south, and Mali to the north, and Nigeria to the south. And currently, the access to electricity in the region is around 53%, which, if you'll see, that is one of the lowest not only in Africa but in the world. So there's a lot of work that is being done to try to change the status quo. And the capacity installed up to now is up to 6.5 gigawatts. But you should bear in mind that most of this capacity, renewable energy capacity, is actually large hydro. So only half of this is represented by the new renewables such as solar, wind, or other technologies. As it was indicated in the first in the previous slide, the access to electricity is still only around 52% in 2018, while the target for 2020, so for last year, was 65%. Right now, we are doing the data collection to understand what was the status in 2020 in order to evaluate the target and see how far we are right now and what can we do to speed up the process. ECREEE has 12 different programs in order to support the implementation of the regional renewable energy and energy efficiency policies in ECOWAS. You can see here on your screen the different programs, but there's the two main ones that are relevant to our presentation, which is the Sustainable Energy Policy Program and the Project Development and Finance Program, which I will be dwelling a bit more in the minutes that I have. But even though you you can go to the ECREEE website to have further information on all the different programs that we have on the site. The ECOWAS, the main documents for the region are the ECOWAS renewable energy efficiency policies, which were approved in 2013 by the heads of state of ECOWAS, and the implementation of these policies is coordinated by ECREEE, working with the national focal institutions in the different countries, from the ministries of energy or agencies for ratification, etc. So there's a work that has been ongoing since 2013 in order to implement the targets set up in these energy policies. And these policies have resulted in action plans to implement the targets in the policy. We have action plans, not only for renewables, but also for energy efficiencies. So the regional targets are translated at the national level, adopted at the national level in order to set up clear guidelines or clear goals for implementation. One of the end results of this action plans is the ECOWAS Investment prospectus. So for each country, it has been developed for most of the countries already. We have been developing investment prospectus, which mean a pipeline of projects that should be the priority of the countries. This here, depending on the level of detail, the level of progress, the level of information available. So pre-feasibility studies, feasibility studies have been developed in order to move these projects forward. These are some of the regional objectives which are highlighted in the ECOWAS policies. You can see here that the targets for 2030 is to have 48% of the share of renewable energy, including large hydro. Without large hydro, this target is 90%. And also we have other targets for clean cooking, for mini grids, and as well for ethanol and diesel and transport fuels. And how do we keep track of the targets? How do we keep track of what's happening in the region? This is the Regional Progress Monitoring Framework. It's a document that is updated yearly. And this is where we have data focal points in all 15 ECOWAS member states who provide us with information that allow us to monitor the progress in the country, what capacity has been installed, which policy has been changed, which new support mechanism is there, and this is updated as in published and is published by ECREEE. The last report is the one from 2018, is available on the ECREEE website, and currently we're collecting data for 2019 and 2020. Normally the 2019 data should be available by now, but because of the pandemic, it was one of the things that were delayed, so we expect by third quarter to publish the updated data up to 2020 to really know the current status of renewables in the 15 different ECOWAS member states. Here you can see the targets by technology, and you can see that solar, including hydro, of course, which is very readily available, but solar is the main energy source available in the region. So a significant share of the capacity to be added up to 2030 should be from solar PV. Then I'll bring you to the ECREEE 2017-21, 10-21 strategic plan, which have 4 main programs: the West African Clean Energy Corridors, the Regional Mini Grid Program, the Regional Off-Grid Electrification Project, and the Regional Solar PV Water Pumping Project for Agriculture. I'm going to dwell a bit more into the West African Clean Energy Corridor here, where we have different technologies. One of them, you see the solar corridor stretching all the way from Senegal to Niger, and below the hydro and as well the bioenergy corridor. And here is just missing the wind corridor for the region. So the West Africa Clean Energy Corridor includes 4 different technologies. And let me just focus here on the ECOWAS Solar Corridor, whose goal is to install up to 10 gigawatts of solar PV until 2030 in the ECOWAS region. And that should contribute a significant share of the region's electricity with solar energy by using the significant potential that we have in our region. The ECOWAS Solar Corridor, the concept for the ECOWAS Solar Corridor, is to achieve a lower cost of generation in certain countries and regions, to conduct large solar procurements taking advantage of economies of scale. In the region, we have issues with the smaller countries being unable to have competitive bids, competitive prices due to the small size of the projects. Here we need to, one of the goals as well of the solar corridor would be to have a regional power planning and procurement options, and to create additional transmission infrastructure to facilitate power trade. So, and that's done in tandem with the West African Power Pool, which is the ECOWAS institutions in charge of large transmission of electricity. Another option that is being done as part when the ECOWAS solar corridor is being developed is the ability of using hydro or other options as a storage solution to facilitate, to compensate the intermittency of solar as well as wind, and to be able to increase the share of renewables that can be used in the grid without any issue with the stability of the grid. One of the main projects we have that is correlated to the solar energy is PAC Solar. This specifically for agricultural competitiveness, to promote agricultural competitiveness in the ECOWAS region. The main objective of PAC Solar is to address the sector over depends on the irregular nature of the climate for agriculture, irrigation through rainfall. Climate change is a big topic for ECOWAS, and most of the countries are seeing decreases or irregular patterns of rainfall. So this program aims at using solar mostly for water pumping and for irrigation to provide other options and to optimize the entire agricultural value chain. This is a new project that is just being set up in 2020, so we hope that it will be one of the main ECREEE flagship projects in the future. The ECOWAS, the other program that we have here that is supporting project developers and only member states is a project development and financing initiative. And here this is a program where technical and legal advice is provided to member states in the auction and bidding process or PPAs negotiation as well. And there are project preparatory activities that can be funded, like such as feasibility studies, and transactional advice is also provided. So member states, developers, ministries are supported throughout this program. And this is specifically targeting medium to large scale renewable projects. And as well, we have the matchmaking and investment facilitation, which is mainly through our ECOWAS Sustainable Energy Forum, which is a yearly event that tries to gather in the same room, in the same venue, representatives from all 15 ECOWAS member states, as well as from international institutions, financial institutions, international banks, all in the same room to try to not only to share knowledge, to share what's going on, but as well to maybe to have deals. That's the main goal of the forum, to have deals that can lead to new projects and new activities. Last but not least, this is something that I think should be interesting to most of the audience. Which kind of support mechanism, what are the regulatory policies we have in the region. So right now, I think we can say that there are different options being used, but that in practice, feed-in tariff is not, even though it is translated into the law of some of the member states. Here we have 4 countries that have feed-in tariffs, but in practice, we're seeing a trend of countries favoring net billing strategies, or having ceiling prices, sub-ceiling prices based on avoided cost of thermal generation, and then having bids where the bidder is selected through the lowest price as compared to the ceiling price. So we have 4 countries that have feed-in tariff in the region, but as I said, this is not quite popular right now, and we see countries thinking that feed-in tariff the cost is too high and is not competitive enough. We have net billing. Here I have the 2 options because that's how the REAN 21 frames it: net metering or net billing options, mostly for households who have excess power, who have a solar rooftop PV and want to connect to the grid. So the 3 countries that already have net billing strategies, Cabo Verde, Ghana, and Senegal, they all chose net billing instead of net metering. So the kilowatt from the prosumer, from the person who has the household who has a rooftop PV, so that kilowatt the cost is significantly lower than the cost of the one coming from from the grid, which is something that the utilities are also always claiming and saying that they in practice act as a backup for those households. So it will not be fair that that kilowatt hour will be compared on a one-to-one basis. So all of these countries have prices. In the case of Cabo Verde, it's set up yearly by the regulator and is calculated as the avoided cost of thermal generation. In the case of Senegal, actually they did some case studies and the cost of kilowatt hour is specific per technology. So there's one for solar, there's one for wind, and it has been into law since 2018. And most of the countries, I think all of the region is using tenders to procure large scale solar. I mean, mostly solar and some wind. That's the two technologies that are more popular right now in the region, well, all of them. And even though you still have some slots of direct negotiation, the direct proposals coming and then negotiation, but it has been, I think it's quite proven that in order to have the best prices to be more competitive, we need open bids, open tenders, and that's, I think, what will help the region, and that's one of the goals as well of the West African Solar Corridor, and that's the way forward, I think, right now in the region. So that to be all for me. This is just some of the ECREEE partners, and thank you for inviting ECREEE to be part of this event. Back to you, Máté.
Thank you very much, Eder, for this very good overview. I really enjoyed learning about the West African solar corridor. It's already really good to see the ambition when it comes to solar installations for the next years. Now, in the next presentation, which will be done by Segun Adaju from the Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria, we will be zooming into one of the member countries of ECOWAS, Nigeria, and hear about the latest policy trends and upcoming policies in that country. So Segun, over to you.
Right. Thank you, Máté, and thank you, Eder, for the brilliant presentation. I think you've set the pace for the West African market and the discussion and my presentation too. Okay, so I hope you can see my slide. Okay, my name is Segun. I am from the Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria. I preside over the association, and I'll just be sharing with you, some policy frameworks, particularly around remuneration schemes like feed-in tariff from Nigeria. The Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria started in 2016. We are a private sector-led association, and today we have over 140 members, cutting across about 4 technologies, basically solar, wind, biomass, and small hydro. Our vision is to ensure the energy mix in Nigeria contains 40% renewables by year 2030. This is basically, what energy profile for Nigeria is. On the left is the energy demand in terms of terawatt hour per year, projected up to 2050 by the Energy Commission of Nigeria. So you can see, the demand, in terms of terawatt hour per year. Okay, so we major focus, industry, cooling, transportation, even cooking, right? And then on the right, you see the generation, okay? Also, by terawatt hour, and you can see the very huge gap that exists. So with business as usual, definitely Nigeria might not be able to meet its energy needs. However, Nigeria is one of the markets in Sub-Saharan Africa that has about the best resource in terms of solar. It's projected that Nigeria could generate over 207,000 gigawatt hour per annum with solar PV. Of course, in the session in the morning, we learned that Africa, accounts for less than 2%, about 1.48% of global PV. So, but yet we have resources, even compared to other part of the world, like in Europe, you can see irradiation very clearly. Now, I mean, narrowing down to solar PV, what the market looks like in Nigeria. Basically, two segmentation I can mention here. We have grid-tied solar, and then we have the off-grid space. So for the grid-tied solar, from about 2016, about 14 companies got signed PPAs, power purchase agreement, with the bulk trader in Nigeria, Nigerian bulk electricity trading company, and that was an aftermath of the feed-in tariff. I'll talk about that shortly. The feed-in tariff policy that was put in place in 2015. Okay, and then on the other side, we have the off-grid market that is also segmented in basically for you have this solar home systems. We have the standalone average of 1 kilowatt and above. We have the IPPs with the likes of rentals, cross-boundary operating in this space. And then we have the very large commercial industrial, basically cross-boundary and RP Global now operates in the commercial industrial. So that's what the segment looks like in Nigeria in terms of solar PV. Also, in terms of policy framework, right from the 2005 Electric Power Sector Reform Act that partitioned, and broke down the utilities into generating and distributing companies, up until 2015 when the feed-in tariff policy was put in place. We've seen a lot of policy reforms in the sector, and I'll also talk about a few of them very shortly. Okay, so looking at some of those policies, let me talk about the mini grid policy. As at this time it was a draft, now is a full policy now. It's catalyzing a huge growth in terms of mini grid development in Nigeria. I think Nigeria portends almost one of the highest markets, if the biggest, a mini grid in this region, with almost about 8,000 potential commercially viable sites already identified by the Rural Electrification Agency working with the GSC. And then several other policies, embedded generation, off-grid, that has made the solar PV market in Nigeria interesting. Then also, I would like to narrow down the feed-in tariff here in this slide. Of course, there are several other policy frameworks that we have seen that has also helped the sector. But let's talk about the feed-in tariff that was passed in 2015 and it supersedes what we call the multi-year tariff order 2, which covered between 2012 and 2017, if I'm correct. But when the feed-in tariff policy came into play in 2015, it provided for concessional pricing for grid-tied solar. Interestingly, off-grid was excluded, and even now there's no net effective net metering policy work in place. It allowed for about 20-year power purchase agreements and required that what we call DISCO, the distribution companies, and the Nigerian bulk electricity trading company obligated to renewable energy IPPs priority access. Okay, so the DISCOs, distribution companies, were expected to buy a minimum of 50%. That means in their energy mix, minimum of 50% should be renewables. Then, the rates initially was very high. It came at a higher rate than 70.7 cents per kilowatt hour. I think it was almost 40 or 42, if I'm correct. But later, it came down to 17.7 US cents kilowatt hour. And then 2016, 14 companies finally signed at 11.5 US cents per kilowatt hour. The projection was that Nigeria will generate about 2,000 megawatts from grid-tied renewables, including biomass, small hydro, wind, and solar, as at 2020. The presentation by Eder, that was almost the same figure for the region in 2020. Then the tariff had limitations because it only applied to projects with capacity of between 1 megawatt and 30 megawatts. And of course, like I said earlier, off-grid projects were excluded. And that led to about 14 companies getting approval for on-grid solar. And also a 10 megawatt wind project somewhere in the northern part of Nigeria that was proposed also to be grid-tied was also considered. Meanwhile, government's target for 2030 was to generate about 13 gigawatts of off-grid solar. I mean, let me remind you also that this huge potential that was projected by government is also not covered by the feed-in tariff. And right now, even no net metering policy yet. So this probably my last slide. But before I go into this, let me also say a few things here. Okay, so we've seen a lot of traction more in the off-grid space in Nigeria for a couple of reasons. The regulation in terms of pricing is more feasible. So, for example, mini grids, it's once you agree, pricing with end users using the ODC platform that's been set up by the Nigerian Electricity Regulatory Commission, you agree price with the community, and you submit to the NEC for approval, then you can charge whatever price is agreed. However, with feed-in tariff, it's restricted based on the power purchase agreement that is executed. Despite the potential we have, and despite the fact that these 14 companies signed this agreement almost 5 years now, none of them have reached financial close for a couple of reasons. And I'll move into some of the constraints that we have seen and what government is trying to do to resolve that. Okay, so for of the companies currently, 2 of them have been able to sign what we call the PCOA. That's a put call option agreement that provide financiers of the projects with the option to terminate these PPA contracts in the event of failure by the government agency to pay within 6 months. So this has slowed down, the development of this project because the financiers, project developers, insist that they want to sign this PCA, almost like a guarantee that needs to be put in place. Okay, and it provided that in case there's default by the government called NBET, the Nigerian Bulk Electricity Trading Company, the federal government will be liable to pay for the full value of the project. So concerns have been that the government agencies credit risk rating, given 1 or 2 experiences, for example, as power and one other project, has to test the capacity of the agency to pay on power purchase agreement. So the developer says we need this PCOA. It's like a pay or take agreement. So once I generate, you have to guarantee me of payment. Then later government says, well, we'll consider this payment, we'll consider signing the PCOA, but it has to be in Naira. I mean, that's Nigerian currency. So that also creates a dilemma of foreign exchange risk. Most projects, particularly grid, almost 90% of their expenditure, procurements of dollar denominated, and over 90% EPCs are imported in dollars. But however, they collect their revenue in Naira, although it's tied to US dollar cent. Currently it's about 7.5 that has been finally agreed. Okay, so it also created a gap of how payments will be made by governments in case they call in this. Because of a few of these reasons, most of these projects are currently stalled, and none of them has reached financial close. The total projects will have been about 1,125 megawatts of solar tied to the grid. So what we're seeing currently in Nigeria is definitely more focused on distributed power, right from solar home systems to rooftop solar for household, for agri in mini grids. This is somewhere in north central of Nigeria. Residential apartments, commercial and industrial, for example. I mentioned cross-boundary, doing about 650 kilowatts in somewhere in the southwest of Nigeria. And I think RP Global also doing close to 700 kilowatt peak. So we have seen that traction, but the market potential for grid-tied solar in Nigeria is still pretty very huge. And we're confident that with the various reforms that's been considered, we begin to see a huge deployment of solar, particularly grid-tied in Nigeria. Thank you. I'll be open to questions at the appropriate time. Hand over to you, Máté.
Thank you very much, Segun. Interesting overview. I understand small scale, off-grid, even grid-tied, small scale works better in Nigeria right now than IPPs, large scale, utility scale IPPs. Of course, there is a certain part of the community that is very much looking forward to larger scale business models and business opportunities in Nigeria. And actually, our next speaker, Silvia Piana, Head of Regulatory Affairs, Africa, Asia, and Oceania from Enel Green Power, represents a company that is mostly active in those segments. So it will be very interesting to hear Silvia's take on IPP models, utility scale models, and how policymakers can enable these segments in Africa. So Silvia, with this, I'm handing it over to you.
Sure. Thank you. Do you see my screen?
Yes.
Very well. Thank you, everybody, and thank you to the previous speakers that already anticipated some of the issues that I'm going to tackle today. So let me start with the key performance indicator to assess the PV potential in Sub-Saharan Africa. What to look for, what we look for? Well, there are macroeconomic indicators and demographic trends that clearly show that all the efforts should be put in place to unlock the renewable energy potential, because there's population growth, demand growth, fast urbanization, renewable energy potential, definitely cost competitiveness of renewable energies. What is still partially at least missing is the development and the full exploitment of cross-sectoral partnership of PPPs, public-private partnership, the existence of the risking instrument. There are many de-risking instruments, but we will see that they might be further enhanced, and the sound regulatory framework, which is the part we are going to focus on today, because the policy and regulatory framework still represents one of the main barriers to the deployment of renewable energies in the continent. And one of the main features of sound regulatory framework is, of course, the presence and the structure, not only the presence, of remuneration schemes. So in the Mr. Semedo presentation from ECOWAS, we already had an outlook of all the schemes, remuneration schemes existing in the Western Africa region. So he went through the feed-in regime, the tendering, auctioning, RES quote obligation that are particularly present in that part of the countries, are less present in other part of the continent, net metering, and carbon offset. Now, for renewable energy quote obligation, let me spend a word, because they're not very often mentioned, but in my experience also in other countries, I also follow the Asian region and the Oceania, they prove to be quite effective in simulating investment, because they're usually linked to the existence of green certificates. So it's usually, in 2 words, it's usually an obligation put on DISCOM, on distribution company, to source a certain quota, which usually is an increasing quota along the years, of their purchases from renewable energy. How do they prove to have sourced this quota? Through green certificates, and renewable plants, PV plants, wind plants are able to sell those green certificates to the liable entities. And this works very well in India, for instance, works in South Korea, works in Australia, and was effective in reaching the targets. For instance, in South Korea, they have even a new feature, because they assign a separate multiplier to each green certificate, depending on the technology that the country wants to exploit more. For instance, if you have ground-mounted solar PV, you will have a certain multiplier. If you have floating PV, which is a technology that the government wants to enhance, you have a higher multiplier. If you have a PV coupled with storage battery, you have an even higher multiplier. So I think that the renewable quota obligation is something that should be more exploited. And the carbon offsets also we just see in the area, just in South Africa, is something relatively new in South Africa as well, because it's linked to the carbon tax. And so far the carbon tax just started. So at the moment, the carbon tax is very low because there are a number of exemptions, but along the year should become more effective, and also the carbon offset market should become more alive, let's say. There are some issues linked to all these remuneration scheme. In my opinion, the biggest issues relate to feed-in regime, because if they are not well designed and well implemented, implementation is key, they might be unsustainable for public finances in the long run. Because we see, particularly for PV, even for wind, but for PV is even more evident. You all know that the price of PV technology decreased a lot along the time. So a tariff that is signed, I don't know, 5 years ago, today look extremely high. So this brought some governments, for instance, in this period is the Kenyan government, but also some other government like Ghana, to try to renegotiate those tariffs. So there are two cases. Either these projects do not reach financial close because just after the awarding, the government realized that the tariff is too high, and so they remain pending and frozen for even 4 years, or the project starts, become operational, and then the government, it's not always like this, of course, in some cases try to renegotiate the tariffs, and this undermines investment sustainability and investor confidence, and this is something really not good for the investment environment in a certain countries. Then there are tenders and auction, which definitely have a complex remuneration scheme in terms of organization. Organizing a tender is no picnic, but it's also the most effective, and we'll talk more about this. Renewable quota obligation, we already mentioned them. Net metering, the limit of net metering is that it's often applied just to small scale projects, but it's something definitely good. And in some cases is net metering, in other cases is gross metering. And the difference is that whilst in net metering, the prosumer, the self-generator just pays the difference among what is withdrawn from the grid and what is reinjected. In the gross metering, the two accounts are separated, and usually what is withdrawn from the grid is more expensive than the amount of money they get for what is reinjected into the grid. So net metering is definitely better than gross metering. But for utility scale plants, this can also be applied in direct PPA when where an IPP is allowed to sell its energy directly to a CNI consumer. This happens not in many countries, mainly in South Africa. And in that case, the IPP is allowed to reinject the excess energy, so the energy not withdrawn by its direct consumer, into the grid, and it gets remunerated for this. And then we have carbon offset, we already discussed about that. So in Africa, Africa is there's a variety of approaches. We already saw this with previous speakers. So the PV market in Sub-Saharan Africa is highly scattered, with development taking place at different speeds depending on the level of commitment of a certain countries, and also the level and the kind of regulation that a certain countries has. In general, it was already said by a previous speaker, the competitive tenders have become and are becoming the preferred procurement option. Where you see the yellow dots is because there you have some further support from international institution, or in the case of South Africa, you have this well-known program called REAP, Renewable Energy Independent Power Producer Procurement Program, that today is at its fifth round. There were also other rounds in the middle, so 3.5, 4.5, I don't recall. But in these days, the fifth round is going on. So what's the problem? The problem is that of the many gigawatt plants of PV projects in Sub-Saharan Africa, just few of them are likely to be built in the short term because of tariff negotiation, financing, siting challenges are very likely to delay or even to halt those processes. This is why the existence of these instruments, such as the scaling solar, the GET-FIT, or the RAPE, where international institution or the government itself, like in the RAPE, gives some guarantees, provides some guarantees, some streamlined permitting, some off-taking guarantees to the IPP, well, there is where things happen and happen successfully. Even with ups and downs, this is absolutely normal. For instance, in the RAPE in South Africa, it took, I mean, round 4, if I'm not wrong, took more than, was frozen for more than 2 years due to several reasons. Also the scaling solar, there were in Zambia, for instance, which is the first country where it was implemented. It took some time because the site chosen at the very beginning was a wrong one. But I mean, it's a learning by doing. So it's absolutely normal to have stop and go. But the important thing is that eventually these projects prove to be successful. Each of these projects, programs, sorry, not projects, have, however, some limitation due to their geographical coverage, their size coverage. I mean, they're not comprehensive instruments. This is why there's another program, which is called Renew Africa, so the Renew Africa initiative that was launched 2 years ago. It's a European-based initiative and an industry-backed initiative, so made by industries belonging to the different sectors of the whole supply chain. So you have manufacturers, you have utilities, you also have consultants and academia, association, financing institution to cover all the aspects of development of a project. Particularly, this initiative is based on the acknowledgement that tenders are the most effective procurement scheme, but there has been too many slowdowns in the tender deployment. So this initiative tries to build on past experiences, also put on the same under the same umbrella, let's say, the existing initiative like the scaling solar, and to enhance them. So to create a supporting instrument for through all the phases of a project development. So from the feasibility studies, but also to operation and construction, because usually other schemes are very much focused on the organization of the competitive process, but then they stop there. They tend to stop there. While the Renew Africa initiative tried to follow the development and the tender process throughout all the phases. And this is because there are many already there are many financing instruments at EU levels, but they're not coordinated among each other. There are too many and not coordinated. On the same moment, the European Union showed very clearly its willingness to invest into the development of the African continent through renewable energy. And this is shown through the Green Deal and all the following instruments. So I think that the Renew Africa initiative tries to put all of these elements together and to really create a supporting environment in order for the huge potential of the sub-Saharan continent to be deployed. It's not just sub-Saharan, it's African continent in general. So what's the way to go as far as remuneration schemes are concerned? There's no magic recipe, there's no silver bullet to set remuneration schemes, because they really depend on the context of each country or of each region. We saw with the ECOWAS that particularly the Western Africa region must be considered as a region, not just as many countries put together, because there are synergies that can be absolutely exploited in this sense. Competitive procurement process, such as auction with bankable PPAs, because sometimes there are auction organized and the PPAs are not bankable. No financial institution would ever lend money to carry on that PPA. So auction with bankable PPAs are the most effective way to integrate solar generation. And when there is the support of international institutions and development partners that can help to de-risk the environment, to offer technical assistance, to offer capacity building for the implementation of such auction, is even better. And now this is my last slide, and maybe the most important one, because we talked about remuneration scheme, but remuneration schemes are just a part of the wider picture. So the KPIs to attract private investment in solar generation are many, are more than just remuneration scheme. Let me go further. Remuneration schemes are not even the most important thing, because it's quite, I mean, renewables are set to reach grid parity. So it's not even necessary to get public money, to get financing. It's more risk mitigation, what is really necessary. And so we divided the KPIs into three categories: openness, attractiveness, and readiness. So the openness is the basic framework of a country that show its openness again to foreign investors, or also to local investors, with a credible long-term energy strategy, unbundled or soon to be unbundled national utility, and non-discriminatory rules for network access. A foreign direct investment sound regulation and reasonable local content rules marks a further step in the level of openness. A few words on reasonable local content rules. They are, I think, absolutely important, absolutely acceptable, because, of course, to bring renewable energy in a country means that you need to bring sustainable development in that country, and local content helps this sustainable development. But it must be reasonable. It must be consistent with the manufacturing capacity and of a certain country. Then there's attractiveness, and remuneration schemes falls into this category, but as you see, there are many other issues. So a clear and fair process of procurement of electricity, permitting, streamlined process for permitting, and bankable PPAs. And the last step is the readiness. So the availability of route to market. So not only tendering with the state-owned utility, but possibly also net metering, also self-generation, also direct PPA are very important to strengthen the development of a country, particularly with direct PPA. I spend a word and then I close. Direct PPA means that an industry or a commercial customer can source its own electricity, getting this way cheaper electricity, because renewable energy is very cheap, and also reliable electricity, because it gets it directly from the generator. Of course, to have direct PPAs, tariffs must be cost reflective. So there must be an incentive to go to the IPP. But to have reliable and cheap electricity for industries means that industries can prosper, and in turn the country can prosper, because they are the real engine for the prosperity of a country. So I think that really direct PPA is a route to market that should be really enhanced in all the continent. And then the network capacity to integrate renewable energy, because it's no use to generate renewable energy if this energy cannot be then transferred to the final consumers. All of this under the big umbrella of sustainability. I don't mention sustainability as something separate, because it's already embedded in all the businesses. So it's something that must be everywhere for everybody today. That's all from my side.
Thank you very much, Silvia, for this really interesting presentation, and also for your very clear vision on what is good regulation, especially when it comes to auctions and tenders. And I think later on in the discussion, it will be interesting to hear some reactions on this, on your recommendations from the other panelists. But with this, I would like to hand the word to our last speaker, Hadyr Koumakpai, General Manager Africa at JA Solar. Hadyr, over to you.
Hi, Máté. I'm trying to share my screen, but I'm still having a couple of challenges here. So yeah, I think here it is. Now, can you see the screen?
Yes, if you can put it on full screen, that would be good, I think. There we go. Great.
Okay, so thank you, Máté. And I mean, I cannot say better than what all the panelists have said already. I will just try to make a bit of, share a bit of information of what I've gathered from my side. I will start, first of all, by sharing some key momentum in the PV industry. In 1941, I mean, the world has seen the first solar cells. And in 1963, solar cell has entered into a mass production. And the first hybrid system solar thermal has happened in 1973. That was far away. So in 1985, we have seen basically 20% efficiency has been reached in terms of solar cells technology. Through many years of development, in 2010, solar LCOE reached 24 cents US dollar per kilowatt hour. And in 2012, global market surpassed 100 gigawatt installed capacity. When you look at 2017, the solar industry has provided over 4.5 million jobs according to REAN. It's important to keep the track on how many jobs is created through the solar, through the renewable in general. In the same time, in 2018, installed capacity has reached 480 gigawatts. And we have also seen the first auction reaching 8.5 USD per kilowatt hour. The same year, off-grid installed capacity reached approximately 3 gigawatts compared to 2008, which was 0.25 gigawatts. So, I mean, last year we witnessed the lowest auction price in the market of 1.32 cents in Portugal, and we have surpassed 754 gigawatts when it comes to solar generation. So here is a couple of factors which have boosted the PV industry growth. To start, we need to have the demand, and power deficit in Africa is obvious. According to AFDB, we are talking about access rate around 40%. Considering the upcoming growth of the continent, the demand could only be growing. And some key infrastructure are important as well, such as access to funding at good interest rates. I will come back on that later. The supporting structure, the grid availability, especially when it comes to on-grid solar PV. Each country have their own development plan and strategy, I believe so, but it might be related to, also, it might be to CO2 emission or the country vision in terms of mix energetic. But it's still important to understand what is available and what is not in the country before set the target, and also take an example of what is happening before and what is happening in the industry. But the last point, which is the most important for all of us here, is the regulatory framework, is what we are discussing here. And there are numbers of mechanisms, structure, and policy to be put in place to reach certain targets. I will try to go more details in my next slide. So, well, there are no magic words, but only right regulation and decision will lead us to a magical and successful solar deployment. Feed or auction, I mean, both has been experienced already. The feed-in tariff has been the most used back, I would say back in a year, and slowly transiting now, changing to auction. We start to see more and more auction in the market, and that has helped a lot to see a very competitive solar offers. As I mean, Silvia have said, it's important to understand if there's no risk and what are bankable or not before start to put auction out there. Is something important to think of. Also, many countries moving slowly in the direction of net metering, a smart move, I should say. Actually, since it gives a lot of flexibility on installed capacity, especially on private level, allow to balance the need of and compensation between, let's say, a producer of power and the receiver. But I should say that policy are often very complex. because you need to put into consideration many schemes, many volume, and how sustainable is the grid, how many you can put in and how many you can take out. So there's a lot of things to think around it before sets that type of regulation, and you cannot just copy and duplicate. You need to be really considered according to the environment where you are. There is also tax and VAT exemption, which are often simple to perform as long as they are political willing. Experiences have shown that tax exemption has impacted a lot in boosting industrial activities and also easy transition from conventional energy power to solar PV over renewable. More and more countries in the continent start speaking about embedded generation that could open extra revenue, of course, to a traditional company, and in the same time create an attractive market for IPP and reducing risk and conflict. To be honest, there is a lot of conflict that we have seen between IPPs, government, private companies, and I think embedded generation could be a kind of way to solve the problem. Generation licenses law could, well, I mean, that could change a lot according to policy around it. When it's needed, it's good to have a transparent and also smooth process to get them, because I mean, you might have generation licenses, but to get them might be a completely different stories. So I mean, it's important to make the process, to lighten, I would say, the bureaucracy behind having those type of generation license. Well, I will share here a couple of case studies. I will start here by Italy. I mean, despite it's not in Africa or neither in North Africa, but it's worth to mention. There are many more countries which have such amazing growth, like the one you can see here on the table from 2007 to 2008. Those peaks are purely justified based on regulation, law, and decree, right? So here mainly by the Royal Law Decree of 661, I mean, if you follow the Italian market in 2007, which set the date and the time to have the FIT and the FIT in premium. Because the question here sometimes is that you have the FIT, but maybe you have no timing. And as the technology grows, there is so many changes could happen in 2, 3, 4 years. So if longer you take, you might be very surprised by what will happen in the next 2, 3 years. And then you will see numbers of renegotiation around the table, which is slow down a lot of process, especially when you have already reached your financial close. So, I mean, there was also some funds which have been available in the markets at a very low interest rate back in time in Italy. Now, we talk about Egypt, another example here. They have set a 42% target renewable by 2035. I mean, the first law was the 203 number in 2014 of the FIT, which has led to a successful Benban solar PV project that we all know today, following by the law of 87 to 2015, opened the market to a private company in CNI. So that's where we start to see a lot of boost in CNI in Egypt. The same success we have seen in Kenya with the FIT in 2008, revised in 2012 by the Act of, I think, number 1, 2019, to solve some land issue, right? Establishment of different institutions to manage also different aspects of the regulation. I mean, we have the opening of institutions like REG, and then, I mean, that has also slid down, support a lot of projects in that time. We should not forget also the cancellation of the restriction to the foreign fund, which gave a kind of comfort and protection as well to foreign investors by the Act Chapter 518. Recently also, Kenya has announced already removing 14% of the VAT on the solar PV. I mean, those type of announcement will be great to see in practicability, because I mean, Segun can say here, Nigeria, there's a lot of law we have never been real in practice when you are really on the process. So this law in Kenya is very great, and we are really expecting to be really practical for the company involved in solar. There are a lot of great progress and good news in the continent, like the increase from 1 to 100 megawatts in South Africa without generation license. We want to see that also. The cancellation, for instance, of the Law 4951 in Nigeria, allowing some level of flexibility in terms of partnership between IPPs and preparing a 1 gigawatt tender and targeting 14 gigawatt by 2023. Zimbabwe, I mean, they have their own challenges, but still they are doing quite great. I want to say that, even though we still hope that many things can happen in that country. They allow recently 5 years tax exemption where you are a solar IPP, for instance, and many countries working also around the net metering and preparing for a net solar boost in the continent. All these actions are definitely very exciting, and we really, I mean, personally, I really appreciate the changes that we are seeing recently in the continent. Well, I mean, a little bit about JA. We are leading solar cells manufacturing. I mean, been in business for long. We are working with numbers of accredited companies like UL, PV Cycle. I mean, top brand in the industry for many years, and in Europe, we have received every year the top brand recognition in the market. We have been existing since 2005. We have 63 gigawatts supplied since by end of Q4 last year. In Africa, more than 1 gigawatt supplied already in Africa. And we have about 12 gigawatt manufacturing base, which might grow by before the end of this year. So that is basically my presentation. Thank you all, and thank you for your time.
Thank you very much, Hadyr. So I think we're at the end of the first round, the round of input presentations, and I think we got 4 very interesting complementary perspectives from a regional regulatory body, ECREEE, from a national association, REAN, the Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria, and 2 companies, 2 international companies, a project developer and a module manufacturer. And now I would like to invite all of you, the speakers, to go ahead with the presentation. So we've already received a couple of questions from the audience, but the first question that I would like to put on the table, and in particular ask Silvia and Hadyr, is the following. So both of your companies are active in multiple countries in Sub-Saharan Africa. I would like to ask you, where in the continent did your company have the best experience, the best PV development experience, or best, business experience, and why? Let's start with Silvia.
Okay, thank you for this question. Well, the answer is quite direct in this regards, and the country is South Africa. In South Africa, where we have more than 300 megawatt in operation from solar PV, we also have more than 900 megawatt from wind. This is not because we had bad experiences in other countries. We are present also in other countries of the African continent, but it's a fact that South Africa is the only country that has followed in the last 10 years, because they started in 2011, a steady path on commitment to large-scale PV deployment, and the tenders were in place already in 2011. There are many enabling policies that helped a lot this development. So it's not only the country that had one of the first competitive procurement program, but also they established an independent IPPO, which is the IPP office that supported all developers, all private producer to go through the tender process. They have an independent regulator, NERSA, which is very often in disagreement with the state-owned utility ESCOM. So it's truly quite independent. They have a government guarantee in the form of an implementation agreement, which is signed at the same time that the PPA is signed. So in the case that the state-owned off-taker will not pay, the government, the state, will pay. They also, in the way of doing things, they have a well-consolidated consultation process. So when a new regulation is examined, they tend to make a consultation among a very structured consultation process among all the stakeholders. So it's very good to have the possibility to directly participate and express the views. This is really, I have to be honest, is not peculiar to South Africa. This is quite well spread, this consultation process. So it's something, that we find also in other countries. It's one of the few countries to offer a variety of route to market. So many ways for an investor to access the market. There is the dedicated off-taker ESCOM. They have a basic framework for direct PPAs that must be definitely reviewed, but they have this framework. They have now free procurement from municipalities. They have the development of self-generation framework that the previous speaker was also mentioning, with the abolishment of the need of having a license. And finally, let me mention that also South African banks are increasingly supportive of renewable energy projects in the region. For instance, I think that Standard Bank, if I'm not wrong, has set specific criteria to regulate the funding of fossil fuels. So, I mean, these are all conditions that enable a good development and reliable development of renewable energies.
Thank you, Silvia. And before moving on to Hadyr, let me ask you a follow-up question, which actually comes from the audience. So you talked about the right design of auctions and tenders, which we all more or less know how they work. So would this mean in the long term that the assets to be developed as part of the tenders would remain in European ownership or in the ownership of the international investors?
Thank you for this question, because this allows me to clarify a very important point. So we are not talking of ownership here. So the answer is no. The answer is no, because ownership is not the only business model that international investors are pursuing. For instance, in the case of Enel Green Power, we are exploring with much interest this so-called stewardship model, where what interests us is the management of the asset for the life cycle of the asset, because we think we can also teach a lot. This is also a way of capacity building in the country. And wherever we go with a partner, a local partner, that can also own the majority of the asset. This is not a problem at all. So 50%, but even the majority of the asset. And so the asset is not necessarily in our ownership. And as long as we go, we have a smaller and smaller quantity of ownership, share of ownership in the asset. Is more management.
Thank you for this clarification. So Hadyr, over to you. Where on the continent of Africa did you have the best business experience so far?
Well, I mean, if I say another country out of South Africa, I think I will be completely out of the market. Well, I mean, first of all, South Africa for sure. I mean, Silvia have said it quite well. Out of the massive project which is going through the REAP, there is a big market there also for CNI. South Africa has been consistent for many years in terms of CNI. If you look at the volume of shipping there every year, I mean, it have never went like super low ever. So all that's due to mainly, I mean, regulations. And those regulations, as Silvia mentioned, I will not repeat what she said, but just to add a little bit on that, I mean, there is a big CNI market out of the utility scale market. The municipality also is pushing out tenders right now. And you can basically have a one-on-one conversation with any off-takers, and that is a big market, a massive market there for South Africa. I mean, on the top of that, obviously we have Morocco, and in Morocco, for instance, there was a law, I think it was 1308, which has been I mean, there is a new law after that of 5815, which puts the initiative of private off-taker as well as private IPPs to sell directly to any off-taker in the country. So basically open the CNI market. And the legislative framework also has been approved in 2019 by the new law number 1419, right? Adding some reform to the sectors. So Morocco also is a great market where we are seeing a lot of things. Same goes with Kenya. I have already spoken about Kenya in my PPTs. And just to add a little bit, for instance, on Nigeria, I mean, Segun has mentioned the reform on the act in Nigeria, which has helped to boost actually about all the CNI market. And out of the utility scale, the big solar project you have in the country right now, all of them are purely based on CNI. So yeah, we say those are the countries. Don't get me wrong. There's about, let's say, half of the continent actually are quite attractive to us. There's a lot of improvement, and we believe that moving in the next coming years, there will just be more and more action toward that direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Hadyr. So with the next question, following up on what Hadyr and Silvia just said, I'm turning to Eder. So Silvia and Hadyr have highlighted a number of success factors around the continent, taking South Africa, or pinpointing or pointing to South Africa both as a good example, highlighting success factors such as the existence of a well-established tendering scheme, the existence of an IPP office, a structured consultation process, and various ways to access the market. So not only one thing, not only a tender scheme, but you know, in addition to the auctions, there is a possibility of direct PPAs and the municipalities, etc. Yes, would you like to react to these success factors, and do you what is ECREEE doing to address to address these challenges and to introduce, you know, these success factors in the West African region?
Yeah, thanks, Máté. I think it was very interesting to hear the presentation from both Silvia and Hadyr. As for ECREEE, it's very important to listen to the private sector to understand the inefficiencies that are still there, to help us identify what can be improved. And that's something that we continuously do with the member states to try to find out which gaps exist in terms of legislation, in terms of regulation, and support them with new texts, new laws, new decrees that can bridge this gap and mitigate these barriers for project implementation, mostly for IPPs involvement. Yeah, South Africa is South Africa. I mean, it's a different ecosystem when it comes to the rest of Sub-Saharan Africa in most cases. But in West Africa, we have excellent cases. I'll always like to speak about Cabo Verde and Senegal. Both countries have very mature regulations, very mature frameworks, and very clear frameworks for tendering, for auctions. Both countries have set up already ceiling costs, and the regulators are very active, and every year the ceiling price based on the avoided costs is published. So any new tender, any new prospective IPP bidder knows what was the maximum price that he can get in a new proposal. And in the case of Cabo Verde, you have these two different venues that you have. From the master plan, the government has already established the different projects which are going to be available for auctions up to 2030. So every year there's already a plan, and the sites identified and the capacity already identified. And so you know, as an investor, what if you are interested, if the site interests you or not. And but there's still a venue in these different countries for direct approaches, for direct PPAs. And there's a regulation, like in Cabo Verde, for example, and it's something that some of the other countries are looking at replicating, where you can identify a potential site that in the capacity, and you do your own studies, and you come up with the government and you say, okay, I'm interested in doing this project. But in order to still keep some transparency, some competitiveness, when you submit your proposal to the government or to the utility, in this case, because they work in tandem, the consultation is always working between the regulator, the government, and the utility, and the regulator is extremely independent, as it should be. I think you know the countries. So you open the process so that any other interested bidder can match or lower your proposal, and that's done for the benefit of the utility, to make sure that you're actually getting the best proposal and the most cost-effective proposal. And as ECREEE as well, we're working, for example, right now with Mali and Niger to support their net metering schemes. I mean, they've looked at what Senegal has done, like what some of the other countries also done in terms of net metering, and now we're supporting them through our project development program in order to set up the legislation for net metering, and to identify what actually what's the maximum capacity, what's the cost. So that's something that we always look at. And in the past few years, many legislation has been enacted in the countries thanks to the support from ECREEE and all our different partners. ECREEE doesn't work alone. We have many different partners, as you saw in the presentation, that help us in actually mitigating that gap. That's our mandate, and we're always interested in getting this feedback from private sector to find out what can be done and what can be done to further to mitigate the gap and support the countries in having the most effective legislation that will allow private sector to come in. So it's not realistic to think that the government is going to do all the investment in renewable. That's not I mean, that's not the goal even, the private sector should come in, but for that, the framework needs to be strong, it needs to be strong, and needs to be strengthened so that there's a win-win situation and the bank of PPAs, fair prices, so that the population is the one that wins at the end.
Thank you, Eder. And I fully agree with you that, of course, South Africa is a different case. It's the largest economy in Sub-Saharan Africa, and but this also brings me to thinking that, you know, joining forces across countries would make sense. That's how we do it in the European Union, and that's I understand the ambition of ECOWAS and the other regional cooperation organizations as well. So where are we at when it comes to, you know, regional cooperation, also in terms of regulation and regulatory harmonization, learning from each other and adopting similar regulations to promote renewable energy investment in the ECOWAS region?
Yeah, thanks, Máté. That's a very good question. So actually, the three main ECOWAS institutions and agencies which are related to electricity, to energy, to renewables, which are ECREEE, WACC, which is a West African Power Pool, and RERA, which is a regional electricity regulator, they're working together for the past 2 years in order to harmonize all this legislation and to make sure that cross-border sale of electricity is made possible and made easier. Of course, the region is very heterogeneous. You have different languages, you have different legislation. We have some countries which inherit their laws from the British system, other from the French system. So all these are some issues that need to be looked at in order to get harmonization. But the Council of Ministers of Energy is quite active and meet yearly to look at the different gaps that we have, and there's a strong now impetus from ECOWAS to make sure that regional directives, as you have in the EU, can be made possible, and then transplanted to the national level to make sure that this you can actually have a regional market for renewables. And that's where the West African Solar Corridor comes in, as I think you saw in the presentation. That's the main goal of the West African Solar Corridor, to make sure that you can have a procurement for 100 megawatts, 200, 300 across multiple countries with the same framework, the same PPA. So that's something that is working on. There's 5 to 6 pilot countries that have already been identified, and you need the buy-in of these countries. You need the buy-in of the Minister of Energy, and you need them to sit at the table and agree to that for that specific project. The conditions are going to be the same. There's nothing that's not easy. So it's a process. That's why we have the goal of 2030. But I think all the countries, especially the smaller ones, they are the ones where they have the most to gain from joining a bigger pool. So I think there's a strong push, and hopefully with commitment from large countries such as Nigeria, such as Ghana, that's something that the West African Solar Corridor can achieve, and it will be a breakthrough to the region.
Absolutely, thank you. When do you think the first joint tender will be issued?
Oh, I don't want to commit any days, but I mean, we're working on it. We're working on it. So let's hope that in the next 2 to 3 years, we can have something very substantial coming to involving 5 different countries. That's what we're working towards.
Thank you. Very exciting. Segun, I'm turning to you. From your perspective, from the Nigerian, from the perspective of the Renewable Energy Association of Nigeria, what are the opportunities, prospects of the West African regional cooperation when it comes to promoting renewable energies?
All right, thank you so much. And I mean, beautiful presentations that's been going on, and also insightful. So, right, I believe that there are a lot of opportunities for the region to begin to, collaborate and explore the opportunities. I mean, we have a lot to learn from Southern Africa. Hearing the success story of South Africa, for example, it's exciting. I know it's an opportunity to also replicate, across other regions in Africa. So, for me, yes, a whole lot of opportunities. For example, with even the free trade area, opportunity exists across as markets to do business. So one of those, so I would like to see it in about 2 or 3 perspectives. Number one, local rules. So for example, regional government through, ECOWAS, of course, particularly ECREEE. How can you, I know that programs and projects that ECREEE has that can facilitate that. For example, we'll be interested in knowing how far or how well ROGEP is going. Okay, many of us private sector players were interested in the regional off-grid electrification program of the ECREEE. Okay, so we've seen also policies at ECREEE level that are being domesticated in each of the markets, right? So that can also help to jumpstart collaboration and businesses. I also see the role of private sector players. I mean, like Just Solar, Enel Green Power, what you've done in South Africa. How can we begin to bring it up to the West African market and see projects are being developed? So the expertise of private sector players is also critical. And I'm also thinking of the associations. The renewable energy associations also have a role to play. I mean, we have a lot to learn from SolarPower Europe to see how can we within the region coordinate ourselves, share experiences, learn lessons. We started that recently. It's still in the in the works. We want to also engage with ECREEE. I'll be happy to update Eder after this event. So a few of us across the West African market, from Senegal to Sierra Leone, Liberia, Ghana, Nigeria, Côte d'Ivoire, Benin, Togo. I think about 6 or 7 of us came together to say, look, can we have a West African, renewable energy alliance that consists of all the associations in the 15 countries, if possible, plus the 4 Sahelian countries that ROGEP covers, and then share a lot of ideas on how we can collaborate. So I believe it's the right time to begin to see how it can work together and how success, I mean, what we have recorded in Senegal and a few of the markets can also come across. I mean, Nigeria has huge opportunity, but there's still some things that needs to be done. I mean, regulation, framework, enabling framework, getting, businesses and companies like Enel and the rest to have more focus on Nigeria. I think it's possible. It's collaboration and cooperation amongst the regional bodies, businesses, even governments will make that happen.
Thank you very much, Segun. So with the last round of questions, I would like to first go back to Silvia and Hadyr, and I would also like to ask you to limit your responses to 3 minutes because we're a bit delayed and our time is limited. But I would really like to explore this topic with all of you. So we've spoken a lot about remuneration schemes, especially auctions and tenders. But I mean, we also said that these schemes are usually tailor-made for utility scale, for large-scale IPP systems. But at the same time, around 600 million people in Africa do not have access to electricity, and the utility grid does not reach large portions of the population in Africa. So against this background, how, and I'm looking at Silvia, how is Enel Green Power as an IPP contributing to SDG 7 in particular, which is, as we know, access to affordable, reliable, sustainable, and modern energy? So you're not distributing any solar home systems. You're also not very active in off-grid. Yeah. How do you do that?
Yeah, this is a difficult one. Would require at least half an hour, but I made it in 2 minutes. Yeah, we're not involved in off-grid. We're not involved in solar home system as Enel Green Power. Other companies of Enel are more involved in this kind of business. But you see, universal access has a twofold perspective. One is rural electrification, but there's also something different to be considered, which is the strong urbanization trend, which is very strong in all Sub-Saharan Africa. And in this perspective, a utility scale company like Enel Green Power can do a lot, particularly under you mentioned, the SDG mentioned reliability and affordability. So renewable energy is affordable because it's cheap. If you don't consider all the subsidies, the hidden subsidies to fossil fuel electricity, renewable energy is even cheaper than the most fossil fuel electricity. is reliable, particularly if coupled with, I mean, if you couple different kind of renewable energy, so solar PV, of course, the sun doesn't shine at night, but wind energy, for instance, is usually stronger during the night. And if you couple them with flexibility tools like storage, so also reliability is provided by, can be provided by an utility scale company. The time to market is extremely reduced, particularly in the case of solar PVs, less than 1 year. This also has to be considered. And I think renewable energies and PV proved to be so much resilient during the pandemic by the fact of being distributed electricity. And there's also the second concept to be highlighted, which is linked to the resilience, which is sustainability, because the SDG 7 also mentioned sustainability. And I said it before, we have always a long-term perspective in our investment. So sustainability, social sustainability, is absolutely embedded in our business in the form of CSV, creating social value. So even when a specific tender like the REAN does not have a specific requirement for socio-economic development, because tenders like the REAN have a certain percentage of socio-economic development to be considered and to be evaluated in the awarding, we always include sustainability concerns in our business.
Thank you, Silvia. Hadyr, what is your take on this question?
Well, I mean, that's quite interesting questions. And first of all, as GA, we have like a very separate team who work a lot on off-grid solutions, hybrid solutions. So we have also noticed like last year, there's hybridization in terms of local content is a bit of lacking. So we organized with our local partner in different countries some training, target training to technical involved in those installations to understand basically how they can reduce the cost in terms of hybridization of projects, especially when they are into mini grid or maybe off-grid system, and how they are able to target that. But I should say that a part of all that, it's still very important to open more access to funds. I don't completely agree for now that at least that in terms of hybrid, the cost is still a little bit higher, especially when you are into mini grid project. And it's very important to see how they can improve in terms of funding access for this particular sector. And at the same time, why not providing a subsidy, for instance, for the mini grid project? Why not? We are already doing that. Government, are already doing that for fossil fuel. And why not transferring to that? Because don't forget that as the impact from the power that is developed in those areas can contribute directly to the social action of the government and also improving the well-being of the population. So I think is a right way to look at it, not only at the power we shall supply. That's not just my take. Thank you.
Thank you, Hadyr. And so building on this question, my last question will go to Eder and Segun. What's your take on the big question of how to achieve universal energy access, utility grid expansion versus mini grids deployment versus solar home systems? Eder, 3 minutes.
Yeah, thanks, Máté. I think at ECREEE we believe that there's not a single solution for the region for ECOWAS. And naturally, we have developed some tools, and actually this was piloted for the Gambia some years ago, where taking into account the density, the purchase power, the cost of grid extension, actually it would provide to the utility, to the Ministry of Energy of the Gambia, a picture of where it makes sense to extend the grid and where a clean energy mini grid would be the best solution. So, and that's, I think, the way we're approaching this for all the different 15 countries. And it should be, okay, when it's feasible to extend the grid should be extended. Where it is not financially feasible, mini grid, and ideally a clean energy mini grid using solar that is available almost everywhere, or even in some cases bioenergy. In some countries like Cote d'Ivoire, Ghana, etc., the potential is quite high. You should go for a mini grid. But even when you go for a mini grid, I think the second part for is very important. You must provide a certain quality of electricity or quality of services. It's not, I think that's not ideal, it's not feasible, it's not what we would like to is for a village of 1,000 people, maybe 100 households, etc., you only provide a small mini grid that only provide lighting for that household. That's not what that's not okay. That's access to lighting, but it's not really access to energy, access to development. So you need to ensure that you have power enough for lighting, for appliances, and to support productive uses in that community. That's the only way that actually these people are going to be comfortable, and maybe they will think about sticking to their rural communities instead of migrating to the big cities, which is a trend everywhere in West Africa. So the quality of the mini grid is very important. And we have some grants to support mini grids, and that's something that we always look at in the evaluation process, in the selection, is to ensure that the level of services you're providing to these communities is enough and it's good enough. Of course, when the density is too low, you have some scattered houses, very kilometers from the grid, and not even a mini grid would make sense. Of course, in that case, of course, solar home systems would play their role, but that's not something that ECREEE is very active in. I mean, through ROGEP, the project that Segun mentions, there was a component for solar home systems, but normally we are focusing more on supporting grid extension or in the through IPPs, or let me rephrase it, we're more interested in supporting the increased capacity, generation capacity for the grid, or clean energy mini grids, which is something that ECREEE is very, very active on. And it should be up to the countries, and we're working now, we have a new project coming with a new partner to really do feasibility studies for clean energy mini grids, to do a mapping of communities of the sites where clean energy mini grids are more financially viable than grid extension. And the legislation should be consistent. So that's something that has happened many times in West Africa, in different countries, where you support a mini grid in X country, and then 2 months afterwards, actually the grid has arrived, because sometimes there's the consultation process, maybe did not involve the utility, and the utility had a plan to extend the grid, but then the ministry was not aware. And those are the sort of things that we should really improve to ensure that we're not spending money where it's not needed, and the mini grids are going to be built where actually they're needed, and where that grid is not expected to come in 5, 10, 15 years. That's something that's also very important, and it will need the different countries, all the different stakeholders, the utility, the regulator, the ministry, to really come up with a clear planning process for the next 10, 15 years, and see which solution we're going to have for each community.
Thank you, Eder. And the same question goes to you, Segun. What is your perspective?
All right, thank you so much, Máté. I'll make it very brief because most of the issues have been raised by earlier speakers. For me, I mean, I'm more skewed towards distributed, energies, systems, particularly for Nigeria, because I mean, number one, our size, it's a diverse, almost 1 million, square kilometers of landmass, and then distributed population, sizes in different regions. So we've seen also the traction that distributed renewable energy has gained in Nigeria in the last 5 years. We're seeing the very strong push for mini grids and solar home systems. We're also seeing huge C&I coming up very strongly. It's a combination of some factors, including, for example, the grid is also limited. So right now, Nigeria, our grid cannot distribute 10,000 megawatts, for example. So there's a limitation. So are we going to wait until the grid is properly, capacitated before we get our energy to those in the rural communities? So it's a combination of both grid, off-grid, but main focus in Nigeria currently is on off-grid. But for me, I believe it's a combination of both. And Nigerian government is also towing that line. For example, there's a Siemens deal to try and beef up the grid capacity to about 25,000 megawatts in some time. At the same time, Nigeria should keep pushing distributed energy. And I also believe even, Sub-Saharan Africa will be able to reach that targets of SDG Goal 7 at the time frame. My views.
Thank you very much, Segun. And with this, we've reached the end of our time and the end of session 1 of the second day of the Global Solar Council Virtual Forum. I would like to thank all 4 speakers for the excellent input presentations and the very good and very insightful discussions. I personally learned a lot today. And to the audience, also thank you. Stay tuned for this afternoon session where we will have a roundtable discussion with representatives of African renewable energy associations. And in the meantime, enjoy your lunch and use that time for the matchmaking sessions. So thank you, everyone, and goodbye.